Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, Methods Guru for Sage Method Space, and I'm happy to be joined today by the co-editors of this new book, Analyzing and Interpreting Qualitative Research, Charles Vanover, Paul M Hawes, and Johny Saldana. And they will be serving as mentors in residence on Sage Method Space for the month of August in 2021. So you'll be able to find a lot of content about data analysis and about their book. But before we get started, if you are new to Method Space, this is a blog community sponsored by Sage Publications, and we're interested in all things to do with designing, conducting, and analyzing research, and writing about it and sharing results, hopefully to make some impact and a difference in the world. You can see at the heart of this Venn diagram, teaching and learning, because we feel that whether you are a student or a novice researcher or an experienced researcher, we all have something to learn. So I hope that you'll find something to learn here today from these co-authors. So why don't we start by introducing yourselves and tell us how you became interested in qualitative data analysis. Charles?
Okay, my name is Dr. Charles Vanover, and I became interested in qualitative data analysis out of two sorts of work. The first was that I was a graduate research assistant for many years on a vast mixed method study where I was about this big. We had millions of dollars for the study of instructional improvement, and we had vast piles of data that we went through. And so I really enjoyed it, just really to gain insight about people's lives from interviews, to understand schools and people's perspectives, especially having, we might have 10 people in a school, 30, 50 people in a district. It was very fascinating. And then the story that I write about in our introduction was that I was at the University of Michigan Narrative Institute, and we would have people come into live sessions a lot like this. And one of the questions we always learned to ask was, because this was back in the day, what did you do with the box of stuff? And by that, I mean that people literally did go to the field with a suitcase, and they came back with a suitcase filled with tapes, photos, artifacts, things like that. And then we were all really interested in learning, what did people do to take all this stuff and create a finished study? And that was all really my favorite question to ask. And I can't tell you how much I learned just really from listening to people tell their stories of, creating a finished study from, again, piles of tapes and all of that.
Great. And Paul?
So I'm Paul M Hawes. I'm the Assistant Director of Education and Qualitative Research at the Odom Institute at UNC Chapel Hill. And I first became interested in qualitative research in my 20s. At the time, I was working as the managing editor of a quantitative journal, a sociology journal called Social Forces, published at UNC Press. But I had a kind of another life as a freelance instructor of creative nonfiction. And so I was hearing a lot of memoirs and a lot of stories that were so much more powerful than what I was reading in the quantitative journal. And I just realized how this form of knowledge acquisition and knowledge building, this creative nonfiction world, which is very much a cousin of qualitative work, and that kind of got me moving in this other direction. And I started to move into consulting and doing my own qualitative research. My first project was with cancer survivors.
And Johny?
Johny Saldana, and I'm Professor Emeritus from Arizona State University. I got involved in qualitative inquiry primarily in the 1980s. I entered the field of research in my own discipline, theater education, at a time when we were getting away from quantitative measurement of children's responses to theater to more qualitative assessment of their work in theater and classroom drama. And so I called myself a cusp researcher because I had to have both the quantitative knowledge to do the current work, and I had to learn the qualitative. Well, my peer reviewers in my field were admonishing me for not getting onto the qualitative bandwagon, which was now the way that my field was beginning to do research. So during my sabbaticals, I like to take professional development courses at my own university. So I studied from Tom Barone, Mary Lee Smith, Sarah Amira de la Garza, and Sarah Tracy in order to build up my own qualitative research skills. So I owe a lot to those 4 colleagues for my own development as a qualitative researcher.
So research, wouldn't generate findings without analysis, as you've described just from your own experience. So what is unique about data analysis in qualitative research or in mixed methods studies where researchers have collected qualitative data?
Well, I would say that it's a practice of meaning making, right? Experimenters, quantitative researchers, they're not making meaning with every iteration of their work, right? While for us as qualitative people, every opportunity to engage with the data, from transcription to coding to every piece of it, is an opportunity to, deepen our understanding of the lives we're studying.
I'll add to that by just using a term from Marcello Truzzi. He's a sociologist. His term is empirical intimacy, which I really love in the world of qualitative, because what that means is that we're getting closer to the research problem. And this is really about context-dependent knowledge. And I think that qualitative research is really best equipped to move us closer to the life world and lived experience of people. And I think that's how it kind of stands out from other forms of research.
My background is as a teacher, educator. And so my teaching background at the high school level was theater and English. And so I come to qualitative inquiry with a literature background, and I see the genres of qualitative research like ethnography, phenomenology, grounded theory. Each one has its own, if you will, style. And so I come to this as someone who looks at research writing, not just as the reporting of findings, but also how do we present and represent.
Right. And so, as researchers, I think all of us who've worked with students have encountered people who thought that, well, analysis is something that you do after you're done with collecting the data. And that's when we'll start thinking about it. And then those of us who are trying to supervise them may be thinking, well, no, you need to think about this at the design stage. So, what do you think that researchers should think through when they're deciding what analytic strategy would be best for their particular study?
Well, one of the things that Paul and I write in our section introduction to the first section is the importance of just figuring out the time, right? That qualitative research is slow cooked. It takes time if you want to engage with your transcription, which you should. It takes time to dig into the coding. It takes some time to do all of these interpretive strategies. And so we talk about the real importance of intentionality, right? That you have to give yourself the time, and then you have to be intentional about using it and understanding that, how much time can I take? And then we also talk about how, among ourselves, about how it's like cooking, right? That you have, this time to, make this stage of the dish, this time to take that, and really thinking through how much time does it take to the end.
Yeah, there's a wonderful saying by communication qualitative researchers Lindlof and Taylor, who said that qualitative research is best prepared in a crock pot rather than a microwave. So I love that analogy.
So in terms of the timing piece in relation to research design and choosing the kind of analytic strategies that you want to use with the study, how do those fit? In other words, at the design stage, when someone's, as a student researcher where you've got a finite time to complete something, you have certain timing constraints, but even for other researchers as they're trying to look at, what is the scope of this particular research and how do the stages fit together? What advice do you have for them?
Well, one of the things that we talk about, and I want Paul to chime in a moment, is the qualitative life cycle. So the idea is to really try to conceptualize, just like you're cooking a meal, all the different stages, and then to use the book that we have many different types of strategies. So to me, the first thing would be to page through, work through the book, find some ideas on transcription, on coding, on interpretive, on art space, on write-up that you're interested in, and try to imagine how your study will unfold. And understand that you're probably going to change your mind some, and that's okay. We have chapters that really talk specifically, our first chapter actually talks specifically about how to change your mind and the issues connected to that.
Right.
Yeah, I think in the design stage, you're documenting your point of departure. What knowledge do you have that's guiding you? What do you know? What do you need to unknow, to use a term by Mark Buckley? What do you need to unlearn in order to be more attentive to what's in the field? And so I think it's really being very clear about that, and then moving forward and thinking about this blend of deductive and inductive, and what is that? What does this particular research person require you in terms of being perhaps more inductive or blending deductive at some point? And so that delicate balance between the two, I think, needs to sort of be wrestled with throughout, but especially at the beginning, you're kind of deciding, oh, how data driven is this, and how much of an exploration is this? How much is the field guiding me? And so I think all of that is important to kind of slow down at the beginning and document this point of departure, but giving yourself room, of course, to evolve and to shift as you need to. When it comes to things like deciding coding strategies and memos, I think all of that depends on which of these practices will help you be a better listener. If coding activates your sense of wonder, that's fantastic. If you need to move into memos to slow down in a different way and become a different kind of listener, if you need to actually listen to oral data, as one of the chapters in our book, James Burnell's chapter on oral coding, if you need to just listen, like actually listen to people speak and hear their actual voices, well, all of these things depend on the question of which of these practices will bring you into that life world.
I think you also need to have, from the beginning, a knowledge bank of what's available to you. Because just like in literature, there are different types of forms like drama, poetry, short story, essay. The same thing in qualitative inquiry. We have phenomenology, grounded theory, intersectional research. All these different genres, styles, and elements need to be taken into consideration as you're doing your research design planning, so that your research question or your research objective aligns with your methodological and methods choices. So having that background knowledge is essential. You got to know the tools before you can start to build something.
Well, that's a good segue into talking more specifically about your book. So, I have a whole shelf full of books about data analysis, and some of them have your names on them already. So what is unique about this book, and what does it offer in particular?
Well, I'll say, to start off, I would say that what's unique is the diversity and then the standardization. So by diversity, I mean, we have 25 leaders in qualitative research from all over the United States, from all over the world, with very different voices, very different opinions, taking you into the nitty-gritty of their process. And so you really get a great range. The standardization is that we worked very hard with SAGE to make sure that every chapter is organized to be easy to read, easy to understand. There's sort of a clear format that we followed so that you can quickly sort of go through the different chapters, find the exemplar, find ideas for practices, do the exercises at the end. So we tried to do both a big, broad sense of diversity, but then sort of a lot of handholds and guidance for people to work through the book.
Well, I like the fact that you are using your own research as kind of case examples. I mean, one of the things that I have found, in working especially with student researchers, that with qualitative research, we have, well, you've got this book's on data collection, this one's on this, and then it's up to you to figure out how to, put all of the pieces together. And, having those research examples gives you a way to illustrate, ways to look at it as a whole.
In each section, so each major section has a little introduction by me, by Paul, by Johny, that gives you a sense of how things work across. The introduction, the conclusion also has a lot of language that we intended as sort of a lift. So if you're struggling with your dissertation and you need some language to describe, why coding, why transcription, why arts-based, we've really tried to have all those, that language right there so that you can access it. We tried to be very user-friendly.
I think the book demystifies these practices and these strategies. It kind of dives beneath the surface of methods. Of course, in a lot of qualitative research articles, there's a methods section or a paragraph, and that's never enough for a student to understand what did they really do. Right. And so this book really opens up those doors, and we see that sort of underbelly of methods that allows not just students but experienced researchers to see, oh, this is how I could do oral coding, or this is how I could turn data into stories. This is how I could dramatize something. And I think that insight, looking at those details, and kind of looking at decisions that researchers make to move them into these strategies, I think the book really elaborates and elucidates all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We really emphasized to the contributors, we want to make sure that we make this a very pragmatic and accessible book. And so we told them, make sure that your writing is how to, not what about.
Right. Right. Yeah, there's so many things that you read and you think, well, gee, I'm glad you figured out how to do that, but how does this help me? So, your examples combined with the how-to strategies should make this quite practical, for researchers. So, Paul, I understand that you also have experience with doing big data analysis using the qualitative methods. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I don't do big data analysis myself, but I'm at an institute where data science is a huge kind of growing force. And I like to sort of remind people that big data is really about data acceleration in many ways. And what we're doing, to go back to the crockpot, which I love, is kind of being more intentional and to kind of engage cognitive empathy. That's a term by Muriel Small, a sociologist at Harvard. So cognitive empathy means that we're trying to really understand things as they understand them. And we can't necessarily do that from this looking at a billion tweets, kind of moves us away from that lived experience. So we need quality research more than ever to kind of to value that human life again. I'd like to use the example of a book by Rashad Tobaccowala. The title is Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. That book is really about the dangers of making decisions only from quantitative data. And it's really addressed to marketing and business people, but it applies to everybody. And that if we're going to make good decisions about interventions and so forth, we really need storytelling, and we need to not only rely on these huge big data projects that are really fascinating and impressive, amazingly impressive, but we still need to go back to the crockpot.
Right. The why behind it, not just say, well, so there are all these tweets about this, but like, well, why did what was actually going on? So you've alluded a little bit, I think, to who might benefit from this book, but maybe you could talk a little bit about how it might be used not only by faculty who are teaching research or supervising research, but by researchers themselves.
Well, we tried to organize it according to the different stages of the qualitative life cycle. So you'll get a book that, we have a very rich introduction that really focuses on sort of core intentional practices. But then we just go step by step into the process, but every step has divergent voices. Every step has a lot of diversity. And so if you're designing your dissertation, then it gives you both a lot of ideas about how to do what you're going to do, and then a big diversity of approaches. Do I want to do, transcription? Do I want to do oral coding? One of my favorite chapters is by Jamie Fidler, and she talks about how she drove to meet her informants every time, about 2 hours, 2.5 hours drive. And so she listened to the previous interview, right? And so she would learn how to engage in your data by just listening to that entire interview before interviewing the next group of people. And so we hope that it will inspire people to really engage with their data analysis, take the time to really enjoy their data and learn from it.
One of the other advantages of the book is that it offers a spectrum of different ways of handling and managing your data for analysis. Like, for example, Jamie Fidler relied on index cards, those old, 3x5 kind of pieces of cardboard that get shuffled on the table with their own personal notes. Yet at the same time, we also have a few chapters on the use of computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software, so that people can also learn how to use certain types of programs with their data. We even go so far as to have the wonderful Sally Campbell-Gallman contribute a chapter on how to use comics and original drawings as a way of analyzing data. So I think that we are quite proud of the diversity of authors and the diversity of methods that are profiled in the book.
So what about for, like, say, people outside of academia, independent researchers, social researchers, people working in NGOs or government agencies? Because I think, as Paul was alluding to, for a lot of places where, they have that, whether it's giant big data or somewhat big data that about trends or whatever, but then realize that they need to bring in the qualitative side, might not be experienced with that. How might your book be helpful to those kind of more professional readers?
Well, I think that one of the things that the book would do for that audience is to, it's so easy to do qualitative analysis poorly, right? And in some ways, the bad practice is enforced by, instead of engaging with your transcription, you hire someone, you just take the tapes, themes emerge from the data in this very theoretical way. And so the book allows people, it pushes people to, really be intentional about every piece. And remember, what are you doing as a qualitative researcher? I'm learning from these people. I'm not learning from my own preconceptions. I'm not fitting these people into a set of quotes that I need. I'm really intimately, as Paul says, I'm, engaged, creating this empirical intimacy with these people. And I think that the book really, it supports that good practice.
And we have a chapter specifically on writing for a broad audience, Jessica Smart Goulian's chapter, and also a chapter on cross-cultural research, which I think is immensely important in our times. And so I do think that we have given people outside of academia some insights into the larger world beyond academia.
Yeah, I've been doing some consulting work recently for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And the topics they've asked me to moderate on have been qualitative data analysis, because there still seems to be that kind of mysterious aura about it, where how do you do it? The second thing they asked me is, how do I convince my colleagues who are more quantitative oriented that qualitative inquiry has legitimacy, that it has some credibility and trustworthiness to it? So those are the two primary needs of people outside of the university setting. They are still fighting the fights, if you will, that we did in academia several decades ago. So the book provides them with some very good rationale to present to those who have a more quantitative mindset what the value of qualitative inquiry is.
And the book has a great range. So we go from very small studies, like Jamie Fidler's study, she worked with a focus group of 4 or 5, to we have a study by folks at George Washington University that analyzed 157 interviews, right? And we have, and so a lot of different ways at qualitative research. And then maybe, again, to build on Johny's a little bit, that qualitative research, the expertise looks different, right? That you're not working with numbers all day. You're not worried about standard error all day. You're making meaning. And so then to be able to really see people that are masters at making meaning, how they do it, I think would be just tremendously valuable.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't discussed about the book?
Here, I'll just, and then Paul and Johny, you got to add yours. I want to add again from what Paul said, the chapter by Elsa Gonzalez and Yvonne Lincoln on cross-cultural using different language data, that's going to be a very well cited chapter. And when I taught this book with my students, every chapter was fascinating to them, but that chapter just gave them like, what do I need to do to figure out how to interview people in Spanish or in Arabic, and then create a dissertation in English. And that was just enormously valuable.
Right.
And Sally Gowman's comic, I mean, that is a great piece, and it's realized art-based research. So we struggle, all of our researchers, to like achieve the level of realization that Sally does, but you can really see, you know, to me, the enormous potential of art space when you look at that comic to really reach the public on critical issues.
All righty, well, thank you for joining me here today. And I hope that viewers will enjoy reading the entire series of posts on method space. And take a look at your book, of course.